You've mentioned data warehousing a lot in your discussion here. Now, I'm just a simple virtualization admin, and I often have trouble sort of separating out what the different use cases for databases are, as they seem to blend together depending on who talks about it. Can you maybe talk instead about some sample use cases and use that to show us what it is that you're trying to accomplish?
Absolutely. As I said before, from the notion of data warehousing versus other databases, don't get too kind of dragged into that this is exactly data warehouses only. Obviously, this is the market force that is currently the most kind of prevalent, the strongest right now. But I want everybody to kind of think about this as a very general solution, also for the general database scenarios, database environments. And as a matter of fact, later in the year, we're actually trying to come out with a couple of products that target systems outside of the data warehousing space. But you actually bring up a good point. Use cases is really what demonstrates and kind of illustrates what's going on. So let's take a look at, we have prepared 3 of them here. And I'll walk you through these and kind of tell you a little bit about the story behind these. And that kind of will give you a good sense of what it is that customers and prospects are currently trying to accomplish and what really is the value that resonates with them. So this first case is a healthcare provider, and they are generally moving from their on-premise data center to public cloud. In this case, this is Amazon AWS. And they have the data warehouse, fairly happy with it, but as part of that move, it's got to go to the cloud. And this is actually another interesting little side story that in the past, database migrations were really about databases. These days, database migrations are almost always, especially when it comes to the cloud, to be viewed in the context of the enterprise moving to the cloud, and then the database is just one of the many assets that need to move. And that has changed the whole dynamics around go-to-market and how to actually deal with customer requirements. But that's just a side note here. So back to this particular prospect. They have a data warehouse that has still a couple of months, if not a year of runway on it. And at the same time, they want to already put their toe into the water, so to speak, and get stuff onto the public cloud. And then at a later point in time, want to cut over. And as you can imagine, that whole notion of cutting over is obviously very scary. There's a lot of risk involved in there. Everything else kind of is almost secondary. Money and time, whatever it takes. But the risk is just really significant. And so what this particular prospect set out to do is, I said, well, why don't we start already with setting up a DR site for our existing data warehouse and keep running this on premises, keep running this in our data center. And at a point in time where it fails, we just fail over to Amazon and to Redshift. And when you think about this, this is a very, very ingenious way of mitigating risk, because that gives them already the ability to play with the Redshift instance and do all sorts of good stuff. At the same time, allows them to run it really 2 ways, and only having to go to Redshift initially the first couple of weeks or months when there is an outage. And so this is a great risk mitigation strategy. Now, if you try to do this with conventional means, that is not possible. So don't try this at home, so to speak, because your application, depending on which way the VIP routes it, needs to either talk to the on-premise or the cloud database. And, well, that normally doesn't work because your application can talk only to one of them. With Datometry in the picture, that doesn't matter. So you can run your application, talks nicely to your on-premises data center warehouse, and in case of an event of a failure or something else and the VIP falls over to the cloud, your application keeps running, and you're now speaking through Hypercube, still the same dialect, the same protocol, etc., but you're running in Amazon Redshift now. And so this is a fantastic way of risk mitigation and kind of gradual onboarding, if you will, into the space. I'll put a couple of numbers down there in terms of savings and in terms of the time that it took to move there and kind of get this all figured out. And if you're familiar with the space, these numbers are just effectively outrageous, because usually you spend way, way more than you save here. The $4 million is the anticipated savings. You spend way more in this in a migration, and usually a migration doesn't take 2 months, but if you're lucky in this case, probably about 1.5 to 2 years. And so it's a fundamental redefinition of these projects. Another use case that I want to quickly survey here, quickly talk about, is a major retailer, and they are moving actually to Azure SQL DW. And in this case, the scenario is a lot simpler. They are going all in. They've done previously, before actually engaging with Datometry, they've done a number of their own testing, POCs, etc., and they felt really comfortable with getting the data there and setting it all up. Their biggest challenge here has been less the operational part, but really the fact that their retail business intelligence system is a very large custom application, so to speak, written over probably a decade or more. And just the sheer amount of queries that this thing fires off on a weekly basis, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 40 million queries, is obviously, when it comes to migration, an almost impossible task. No matter how you slice these numbers, you always end up with 100+ people working for at least 5 years to change this. And that's a non-starter. People really need to move quickly as the enterprise moves to the cloud, and they just can't leave the database behind. And so for them, Datometry enabled that whole problem to go away completely with massive savings, because that's a very large customer, but also with a relatively short, well, almost impossibly short timeline. As I said before, even simple on the back of the envelope calculations gets you into multi-year, multi-tens of million dollars projects. And we were able to demonstrate to them that they can actually do this within a quarter. And as you can imagine, they were blown away. Initially, the standard reaction that we get from every customer prospect when we start talking about these things is, whoa, this is too good to be true. This cannot be true. I've done database migrations before, and it's always going to be a big mess. And so then we engage usually in a POC very quickly. And what customers and prospects really like about this is that as the customer, as the user, you actually don't need to change anything. It's no longer your classic database POC that takes, 6-9 months or longer, because as a customer, you need to craft POC queries, you need to decide what's representative and all that stuff. With Datometry, you can actually run your actual workload, and you have very little resource usage on your end to kind of set this up. This is usually a thing of a couple of days. And then you have almost no risk, because if this doesn't work, you can always just go back. You haven't changed anything in your environment. And that is the element that really resonates with enterprise customers. Because naturally, anybody who wants to move to the cloud thinks they need to be prepared to spend years to even figure out the basic plumbing. And so this is really kind of a fresh breath of air, so to speak, for them. And since the risk in POCs and the level of involvement is so little, that makes it so easy for them to just engage in a POC, and so easy for us to convince them that it is actually possible. The last use case I want to quickly look at is an actually on-premise, if you will, private cloud use case. And that's a financial institution. And the scenario is very similar here. Their use of a private cloud is a little special, and that's why I wanted to call this out, and gives them kind of a different level of control, kind of technical details that are probably not really relevant for this conversation. They have a major middleware application in front of it, and several thousand interactive users typically hanging off this. And in this case, again, Datometry does the translation. This is a workload that is particularly heavy on stored procedures. But we also do the metering of the traffic. So there's yet another interesting element in there where thousands of connections that come in kind of get broken down and metered down to a reasonable workload onto the pivotal system. This is kind of the other side of the same coin, where just having the functional support in terms of SQL and data types is one thing, but you also need to be able to deal with the operational side. And for example, Teradata has a very elaborate workload manager, and therefore, we need to give customers something that actually lets them emulate that as well. So that's the use cases I wanted to talk about. All of this, I believe, is going to be in the PDF that we distribute later on. And that, I think, gives you a good sense of what are typical ways people deploy us.
Okay, well, thank you. That's an awful lot of information. I am told that we have a short demo video which might help clear some of this up. And then I will jump directly into audience Q&A.